hello. Hi, hello. Please feel free to come down, by the way. We like to have a nice, cozy group. With a room full of so many social entrepreneurs, I feel a bit like talking to you here. It's a bit like, to use the very strange English expression, like teaching your grandmother to suck eggs. Now, this is nothing to do with breakfast. It's a very odd English expression, which means teaching or sharing something with people who know far more than you do. And I'll explain more in a second. For those of you who I haven't met this week and who weren't here when we recorded the show last year, I'm Emily Casriel, and I'm executive producer of The Forum, which is the ideas show on the BBC World Service, which itself reaches over 160 million people every week. Now, yesterday we heard Pam Hartigan talking about social entrepreneurs tearing down walls. And this is something that felt very familiar to me because since I launched the show 4 years ago, every week we try to tear down walls between cultures and between disciplines. And we do this in order to address some of the really big questions of our age. So one week we might have a Nobel Prize-winning scientist with a poet and a historian. And we ask them to draw upon their own authority to really share ideas. And that's really, really exciting. To make you feel at home, it can be a little dangerous, it can be a little unpredictable, and it can be even a little disruptive. Now, today we're tackling the very sensitive idea of trying to achieve a partnership of equality. When social entrepreneurs come to local communities, they might come from inside or from outside. Is this something that they should achieve? And if so, what are the best ways of doing so? Now, you can catch this show that we're recording today. It will be broadcast on Sunday week on the BBC World Service. But you can also download a podcast on iTunes, or you can listen online. Just search for BBC The Forum. And if you want to continue this conversation today at the Said Centre, if you want to go to one of the Cisco collabs in room 12 and 13 in Said, that would be fantastic. Now, the host of this show is the very eminent BBC broadcaster, Bridget Kendall. Now, she was the correspondent in Moscow at the time when the Berlin Wall was being literally torn down and the Soviet Union was falling apart. And she then went on to be the correspondent in Washington, D.C. And today, she's the BBC's diplomatic correspondent. In the last few months, she's been covering revolutions in Libya. She's been covering the scrupulously democratic elections in Russia. And she's not only in Moscow, in Siberia as well. So it's fantastic to have her with us here. So this is where we need your help. At certain times in the show, Bridget is going to be turning to you for comments. Please keep them brilliant, but brief. And say who you are, your name, and what organization you work with. That would be really, really helpful. And we're going to be asking you about some of the solutions and some of the pitfalls about creating partnerships of equality or not of equality. Now, I have to say that Larry Brilliant, who we had on the panel last year, he's doing a neighbouring session, and he did volunteer to come in here at the middle of our session and do a little meditating session, which I thought was very, very interesting. But instead, what I thought would be even better would be asking you to misbehave. Now, I think it's quite easy for you. It's your natural space, like sucking eggs, to misbehave, be a bit noisy. I know it's the BBC, and I know we're British, but most of you are not. So I think it will be easy for you to be a little noisy. If you hear something that you really agree with, just burst into spontaneous applause. And if there's something which you, have a bit of an objection to, feel free with a bit of a hoot or a jeer. This is radio, and we need to show to our bosses in London. We've got one of our bosses here, Jeremy. But for the rest of our bosses in London, we have to justify that we've come to Oxford, and we need to hear that you're there. And I'd be very, very grateful. But at some other parts of the show, Bridget will be turning to you for some spontaneous applause. That would be fantastic. We like to plan a bit of spontaneity. I will, though, ask you to turn your mobiles to silent. But if you want to tweet, that would be great. We are at BBC The Forum. And also, of course, use hashtag Skoll.org. So at this stage, I think all that's left for me to do is to welcome onto the double forum stage our guests, Brizio Biondimora, Willie Foote, Geeta Rao Gupta. And of course, the BBC's Bridget Kendall. On the applause, I should say, we've got to pretend we've got a whole room packed of you. So I'm sure, when we get to it, when we do it for real, we can make it louder than that. I'd be very, very grateful. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Well, it's really great to be back here at Skoll in Oxford. Let me just ask to begin with, I wonder how many of you were here at our session last year? Hands up? Oh, quite a lot. Oh, I'm glad you felt you wanted to come back. Those of you who are here will know that you're part of the show too, and we're going to be coming to you and asking you for your views as well as hearing from the panel. Just before we start, Emily was talking about sucking eggs. I'm going to ask my panel, all three of you, just to tell me one after another what you had for breakfast so we can just check your microphone level. Did you have eggs for breakfast, Peter?
I did. I had scrambled eggs and a sausage.
Just checking upstairs. Can you hear me? And are you happy with level? What about you, Willie?
I had a baguette with a bit of cheese on my scrambled eggs, yes.
And Brizio, what about you?
I had no eggs, but a nice little piece of Parmesan.
As befits an Italian. Just Parmesan?
Yes.
I'm just waiting to check that I can hear Emily upstairs before we start. Yeah. Good. Okay, off we go. Hope you all enjoy it. A warm welcome to the forum from the BBC, and from me, Bridget Kendall, and an international audience of social entrepreneurs here with me at the University of Oxford. We're in Oxford for the annual gathering of the Skoll Foundation, and we're here to discuss partnerships. When social entrepreneurs seek to change the status quo and empower local communities, what kind of partnership do they create? And can it ever be really equal? With me on stage are William Foote, who runs Root Capital, a non-profit organisation that invests in small-scale agricultural businesses, Geeta Rao Gupta, the Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, and Brizio Biondemora, the President of Avina, a foundation working towards sustainable development in Latin America. Let's welcome them. Can I start by asking each of you briefly, how do you personally engage with people whose lives are very different from yours? Geeta?
By sort of sharing or asking questions about the common human experience, I would say. So, for example, meeting a woman who's pregnant for the first time, sharing with her and asking her about the joy and the fear of labor that's about to happen. Or talking to a child, playing games, the famous "Where's my middle finger?" or peekaboo, depending on the age of the child. So I think there is a common human experience that you can draw upon, even though you belong to very different cultures. And dancing helps too.
What about you, Willie?
Well, I'm a balding white guy from Midwestern United States, so the way I go in often is as follows. Ay, Nicaragua, Nicaragüita, la flor más linda de mi querer, abonada con la bendita Nicaragüita, sangre de Diriangen, or if I'm in Zimbabwe, Gina Rwanza se kurera rufumu mawoko, pukaniwina wo kutsechiwana. So I'm actually...
That was great, Willie. I hope you're going to sing again in the show.
In modesty aside, I'm somewhat famous in northern Nicaragua for being one of the few gringos who can play a lot of the folk songs from the Sandinista Revolution. I don't go in pretending that I'm a campesino, but I do often go in with a guitar and play music and, the noisiness of nationality and wealth and stature to a certain extent start to fade away.
That's great. What about you, Brizio?
Well,
Do you
I
sing?
think I'm more sorry?
Do you sing?
No, I don't. And, I realize I have a lot to learn from Willie. But in any case, for me, it is essentially being honest and showing respect. Now, this means nothing in theory, because I don't know anybody who will willingly show disrespect or not be honest. So let me give you a 5 seconds example. 2 weeks in the job, I have an old and poor woman coming to visit me and riding a crowded bus for 500 miles, taking 2 days to do that. When I learned that, I said to her, well, the next time I'm doing the riding in the bus, but on one condition, that you teach me how to go to the bathroom when you have 24 people standing between you and the door and the bus has no reason to stop. She started laughing. And it means, one, honesty, because I was telling her that I'm not riding usually buses. So I was coming from a privileged background compared to her, and then she trusts me because I'm trying to fake that I'm poor. And the second one is essentially I'm showing that I'm willing to learn from her. And then she feels that we're on the same basis.
It's so interesting that all three of you have, in different ways, talked about the same thing, which is about showing you're individuals, first and foremost, relating to people as individuals. But of course, the dilemma, if you're a social entrepreneur or working for a big organization, is that you're not just an individual, you're representing an organization too. And for example, Willie Foote, you started out as an investment banker, but switched to found Root Capital in order to lend to farmers in Latin America, too small for commercial investors to be interested in. And you're now helping businesses in 30 countries, I think it is, across Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, your organization, Root Causes, is supporting worthy causes, especially as a social investment fund working in challenging post-conflict zones. But is there this problem that as a representative of an outside organization, do you think sometimes outside investors seem, or maybe they are, guilty of throwing their weight around?
Yeah, I really struggle with this issue. I think as a community of people kind of in pursuit of social change, we are kidding ourselves if we don't think we have an unbalanced power relationship, and which can, I think, have perverse consequences. So an example, last fall, we conducted an impact measurement study in Burkina Faso and West Africa with Mango community, farmer communities that we're working with, who try to understand the benefits of selling to an agricultural business that we're financing. And Burkina Faso is a very poor, landlocked country, a lot of development agencies there, and a lot of them do impact measurement studies. And one of the farmers that we interviewed was so sick of people asking him about his poverty level. He said to us, here you come again asking me your silly questions about how poor I am, how many acres I have, and whether I have a cement floor, how many children, and you're going to take that information and you're going to sell it to your aid sponsors. And more or less, quote unquote, you're all crooks of the same family. And that's a very sobering interaction to have with one of your clients. And I think what it speaks to is there's a real clash of realities and priorities and agendas. And we at Root Capital, I think a lot of people at Skoll World Forum, have an agenda that after we make a loan to a cooperative, it's about efficiency, it's about accountability, it's about transparency. We are the ones who have to do impact measurement. We have to send quarterly reports to our investors and our donors. But that agenda clashes with the agenda on the ground. And the agenda on the ground for farmers is the rhythm of the seasons. It's when the rains come, you plant. When the fruit ripens, you harvest. And you're not really concerned about sending quarterly reports to investors. So I think we've got to acknowledge that clashing reality. And in so doing, begin the process of having a more equal partnership with folks whose reality is very different from yours.
Do you think it's particularly the case in agriculture, which is the field you work in?
I think it is. And as a result, most of our loan officers may come with experience from a commercial bank or microfinance, but virtually every single one of them has an agricultural background as well.
I actually have had an experience once where a community held me accountable for exactly that kind of thing. You're coming in here and expecting us to answer questions. And it wasn't me, it was a researcher who we had hired to do the work. And he called us to say, they won't let me in unless you show up, because they want to know where's the money coming from and what's the motivation and what are we going to get from it. And I found that a real eye-opener for me, because this was a traditional women's organization in southern Senegal. And, we were trying to introduce HIV prevention education through them for their communities that they serve. And the mother of the Dimba society that we were working on insisted that I show up and participate in a ritualistic contracting arrangement with us, where you tell us what you're going to bring to the table, and we'll tell you what we bring to the table, and then let's agree on how we're going to work together. So ever since that experience, that was early in my career, I try and make as explicit. So I think the principle of honesty and transparency is very important for establishing a partnership with the community, because it is an imbalance of power. There's no question about it. And you come with an agenda that may not be theirs.
What do you think, Patricia?
Well, we faced that very important issue from the very beginning. And fundamentally, we come up with a solution that I didn't make, but frankly, meant a lot to us. Our mission, as we defined at the beginning, was to support and partner with whatever is the counterpart in their vision and in their aims. So we had no agenda. Our agenda was their agenda. And we told them from the beginning that we don't feel that we contribute with money. We contribute different things to the same goal, which is achieving whatever it is. And we fail together and win together. So it was really a partnership from the beginning. But the driving thinking was theirs, not ours. That, to us, made all the difference. Now, it just happens that they knew a lot more than us. And so their agenda was more appropriate, better timed, and fit more to the context than we could have ever imagined.
Can I jump in on that? Because a different angle on the same issue. Sometimes their agenda is not as good as ours. An example, we are not working in the UK. We're not working in the United States when we go to a lot of these markets. And we started working in Haiti about 1.5 years ago. Sometimes you actually have to compromise, not on your principles, but you have to change kind of your perspective based on local reality. So, for instance, if you want to work in the mango chain in Haiti right now, that is an unreconstructed supply chain. It does not necessarily benefit smallholder farmers right now. You have to work with the oligarchs in Haiti to work in mango in some respects. What you look for is creative disruption and kind of the next generation, and that's what we're working with, where they're kind of the 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds who inherited these businesses from their parents, and they really want to do it differently. They want traceability, they want transparency, they want the farmers, they want shared value. But if you come with too high-minded principles, you're not going to get anything done. So you have to compromise and kind of meet people where they're at.
But
I think you're right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think you're right. You just point to the complexity. So I would say the following. We didn't partner with just anybody who was coming with a project. We had the option to say no. But when we said yes, it's because we bought their project. In other words, it made sense to us too.
Yeah.
Then there was no conflict. Mm-hmm. But it was their project.
Mm-hmm. It'd be interesting to hear what you and the audience think about this, whether you need to compromise on your agenda in order to make that connection. And how far do you compromise? We'd love to hear from you. Do wait for the microphone. Say who you are and where you're from, and comments, please, briefly, not questions. Would anyone like to say anything? Yes, there's a hand up here.
Good morning. Andrew Fidderman from Youth Business International, helping young people start up in business in 34 countries around the world. I think there are two things. I think we sometimes have a danger of turning around and saying that we're from head office and we're here to help you. We're not addressing local concerns and the local issues. So I think one of the important things is we shouldn't go in with a degree of we can solve your problems. It's understand what they believe are the local problems, I think is incredibly important. And I think a part of that is we sometimes talk about let's try and achieve equality, when perhaps it should be equity. What are we all bringing to the party? What are we all bringing to to make a real change in the communities that we are serving, to make them more sustainable and able to stand on their own 2 feet.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, over here.
Yeah, hi. Andy Whittaker from Dogwoof. We're a film distributor. We do a lot of social issue documentaries, like The Island President. But I was fascinated when you talked about shared value. So I'd just love you to, is this like a future of social entrepreneurs? Or, how do you see, small companies or small cooperatives working with, big businesses like Hewlett-Packard, Cisco, the people who talk about shared value? Is it just a new spin on CSR, or is it a genuine new business model?
Bridget, do you want to answer?
Well, I think that shared value, if one take it seriously, I think offers enormous possibilities, because there is a natural win-win situation. And a company fundamentally that sees that making profit by essentially taking into account all kind of other factors that were not internalized before is better, create a more stable environment, I think it's all for the better. I remember somebody who said, we're not trying to be successful in a failed society. We cannot be successful in a failed society. And a company cannot succeed in a failed society in the long run. So if they are part of the solution, shared value is, I think, a good answer to that.
Can I pick up on the comment made about profoundly understanding their agenda, as it were, and kind of going from that basis? Something that makes my brain hurt, that's a super important issue that is difficult to talk about, is that we are trying to support, finance, build agricultural businesses that are stabilizing household income in, say, a Burkina Faso. But it is impossible. Last year we financed 200 plus businesses representing 250,000 farm households. You cannot monitor all of those households. And what happens in the household level is that children in most farms in most developing countries during the harvest period are taken out of school to work on the harvest. Now, that might seem, from our perspective, that's horrible, but their parents will not have the money to pay for their school uniforms, their books, their fees, if they don't work during the harvest period. So you can't change everything at once. You have to understand their agenda, which is just as important as the agenda that we come in. But it's one that you can't, with everybody all the time, you can't really talk about that issue because it's very loaded.
Do other people here have similar experiences of conflicts, of the need to compromise with local agendas? None of you?
I think you have to compromise to succeed.
There's a gentleman here.
Michael Gordon, University of Michigan Ross Business School. We've had some experience working in places such as Kibera, where actually in Nairobi, a slum, where actually the opposite thing has happened, in the sense that some of the people we were dealing with were trying to calibrate us to see what was the maximum value they could extract from the opportunity we were offering. So in a concrete example, working for this company, SC Johnson, and we're trying to co-create businesses with them. And the proposition that some of our partners in an early stage offered was, we'll wear the SC Johnson T-shirt, you give us a truck. So the power relationship is not always one where the community that you're dealing with feels that, you are holding all the cards. Sometimes they're trying to, see if they can, give you one card and they'll retain 51 of them.
Good example. Anyone else? Yeah, there's a hand up at the back.
David Griswold, Sustainable Harvest. We work with Willie Foote and Root Capital, and I know that often we have to gather metrics from members to see what's the impact of what we're doing. What have you seen out there to sort of find out how can we make the measurement, the poking and prodding that we do that you spoke about, Willie. How can we make that easier on farmers so they can do it as part of their work?
Well, we have a very interesting project, which is, I think, part of a larger movement around impact measurement, which is trying to build in user-centric, almost reciprocity. And if we're going to ask a one-acre farmer who's got a heck of a lot of things to do during the day to answer a bunch of questions about the size of their farm and how many chickens they have, are there interesting ways, for instance, to leverage technology where you can do that really cost-effectively but also create a benefit for them? For instance, we're working on a mobile technology where when a farmer delivers product to the warehouse at harvest time, we say, okay, will you on your mobile device provide XYZ information about your household? And in exchange, we will send you via text message soccer scores and prices for the market. And guess what? Soccer scores was their number one desire. Second was markets.
I wanted to pick up on something that's been rolling in my head as you've been talking. Maybe I'll ask you, Geeta, because you're Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, a big United Nations institution, but you've got a lot of previous experience, especially working in development organizations for women. Do you think that the more in an area you have various NGOs working, you talked, Willie, in West Africa about it being an area where there have been a lot of different organizations, that people become more sort of transactional in their attitude to what outsiders bring? Or do you think actually that the more that there is a culture of development in a certain area, people have more understanding and more acceptance of what outsiders are trying to do?
I think that communities are pretty sophisticated these days. I mean, it's only in very remote areas that they haven't already been approached by some organization with some kind of development activity. And to imagine that you're approaching a community because it's helpless and you're going to save it or benefit it in some big way in a way that they will have no say in is a recipe for failure. So I think that regardless of whether there are many NGOs, you should just enter with the assumption that this is a community that knows you have something to offer, that you're here with an agenda, that hopefully you'll enter knowing that you're there because they have something to offer too, that they can bring to the table. And that as long as that conversation occurs early on, I think that you can have success. But it is going to involve some level of compromise. There's no question about that. Just to go back to the earlier point, we've had numerous occasions where working with women, for example, as a women's organization entering a community, wanting to empower the women or deal with domestic violence or some issue that's incredibly sensitive within the community. If you try and empower the women by just bringing the women together and talking to them about the issue and getting them to speak up, you're probably going to have really disastrous side effects for them and their lives. So there is a way of dealing with all issues once you understand and listen to them on who are the gatekeepers, for example, in the community. For women, unless you talk to the elders in the community, involve them, involve the men, you're not going to be able to bring about the changes that you're seeking to bring about.
So this is a sort of compromise, actually, isn't it?
Yes, it's a compromise, but you have to recognize that you can just be a catalyst. Empowerment is a magical thing that happens to people if they have resources and information. It's not something you can make happen. You can catalyze a process, but you can do it right only if you listen to the community. And if they tell you that there's certain barriers to you succeeding, you have to pay attention to that and compromise and shift your agenda accordingly.
And going back to the perverse consequences that can come with an unbalanced power relationship and not listening enough to the community. So we work a lot with shea butter producers in West Africa, especially from West Africa. And shea butter is made from the nut of the shea tree. You can buy a lot of shea butter at the body shop. And it's referred to in West Africa as women's gold because the women keep the cash traditionally from shea butter, and the men keep the cash from livestock and the farm crops. So you think, okay, fabulous. You're increasing by 3x women's income, and that's great. But these are traditional Muslim societies largely, and if one woman makes a lot more money than the other women in the village, they can become ostracized. They'd be isolated. They can even be subject to empowered, or just you don't understand that there are conflicting kind of moral systems at place. And in a traditional Muslim society, that's a very difficult thing to address, where one person gets a lot more money than the other. So what do? And how is it being addressed? Is the shea butter producer cooperatives are saying, okay, let's pool the resources, or much of the resources where certain folks make more than the others, and let's invest in community-defined development projects, deep water wells or maternity wards or whatever. But if you come in and don't understand that, you're counting your impact measurement and this much increase in household, and you've actually created a serious wedge in the community without even knowing it.
This brings, I think, an issue of values in the whole relationship. And let me give you an example in Latin America. We all know that we need leadership for making things happen. Now, in Latin America, and I don't want to be biased toward Latin America, but there is a culture in which a leader is a caudillo, which means he is a sort of dictator. And we could use the word leadership in a way that could be totally misinterpreted. So we define, for the sake of clarifying the relationship, that for us, leadership meant a proven track record to succeed in helping others grow. That was the opposite of what they thought about leadership. In fact, talking about accountability and meeting goals, etc., well, if I'm a leader, I should not report to you, because the very essence of leader is that I'm not reporting to anybody. Now, imagine the change in terms of value and perspectives. So one of the things that we found very useful was to spend time on the ground, to really know the people before you start doing business with them. And then if you have a commonality of values, and those values can be found across cultures, across all kinds of parameters, then it makes all the difference.
But coming back to women's issues, promoting the rights of women, as Gita said, this is a very sensitive issue, and people have different views in different societies. Have you come across that as a problem, Bridget?
If the values, if there is a commonality of values, I think we can always find a common ground.
Yeah, but I think, it's common values, it's the process that you use to uncover what the values are. I think you have to be honest that we do come with a particular goal in mind when we enter a community. And the problem occurs when you come with a sort of stereotypical notion of how you're going to proceed and what you're going to see. I mean, I remember when I was working on a HIV prevention project in Nigeria, in Ibadan, I came there with the notion that college girls, we had heard, were having relationships with sugar daddies because they needed money for tuition. And therefore, we had to help them get the tuition money in order to protect them from this risk to HIV, as well as tell them about condoms. Well, after conducting this entire focus group discussion, where all of my questions in the discussion was sort of guided in that direction, a young woman said to me, "Can I come see you in your room afterwards?" And she came with her handbag and said, "Yes, there are some girls who are pressured to enter into these relationships, but we are quite pragmatic," she said. "We, like most adolescents around the world, have needs and we have wants. I'd like to have a handbag and a lipstick. And sometimes a rich guy who comes along and pays me some money to go along with him to a party gets me that, so I might do that. But doesn't mean I don't believe in romantic relationships. I have a boyfriend on the side. We call that a spare tire. He's there to help me with the romantic relationship." So what I discovered through that conversation was, and then in her handbag, she opened her handbag and showed me antibiotics that she carried, which they all believed would protect them from sexually transmitted infections. So the education that was required, or the information that we were then, that we should have been sharing, was very different from what we came prepared to share in that community. And this traditional notion, especially with women, that women are victims, and that, so in her view, they were pretty empowered.
This is what Fabrizio is saying. Is find out on the ground what the situation is before you make assumptions.
Absolutely.
Coming back to kind of social entrepreneurship in this context, I think it's a totally false dichotomy or false premise that it's about outsiders coming in this day and age, because the vast majority of the social entrepreneurs I know are local people working to try to impact their own communities. Now, maybe they're based in Nairobi and they're working in rural areas, but a lot of our organizations are about trying to remove the obstacles, the barriers for local social entrepreneurs to work. So an example, back to women and kind of sharing, and we have an incredible loan officer based in Dakar, in Senegal, named Diaka Sall, who she worked 5 years at Citi in Dakar. And she's now, as a social entrepreneur, working through capital, local person, kind of unleashed to take her private sector experience and go where her grandmother always hoped she would go, which was to very rural areas of Senegal and Burkina Faso and Mali, and to see the women in those villages watching her as a loan officer there, talking to the village, elders and the chiefs, and doing the due diligence. It's a wonderful cognitive dissonance that you can cut like a knife. And just lastly, about a month ago, I was in Burkina Faso, near the Mali border with Diaka, and we're sitting underneath a cashew tree with about 15 members of a board of directors of a cashew cooperative, and a couple of the members, one in particular was a woman, Muslim woman, and she and Diaka, you'd have thought they had found their long-lost sisters. They were so excited to meet each other, and anyway, that creative disruption that happens through local social entrepreneurs, and especially women, modeling behavior for other women is a powerful thing.
Lots more to talk about. You can join our discussion on Twitter and facebook.com/BBC Forum. But now, a small break for the latest world news from the BBC. Back in a few minutes. We'll just do a slight technical check and we'll carry on with part two. That was fabulous, all of you. I couldn't hear a thing. Okay, just let Radek return and we'll carry on. Let me know when you're ready upstairs. Yeah. Instructions from Emily not to creak on our chairs. I think I'm the main culprit. And when I come to you, we really want to hear from you in the audience because it's such a great opportunity for our own audience, our radio audience, to hear from all of you, as well as my three lovely panelists. So do be sure to take part. Okay. Hello, I'm Bridget Kendall, and welcome back to our special programme from the Skoll World Forum at the Side Business School at the University of Oxford. I'm here in front of an audience of social entrepreneurs who take bold ideas from the world of business and look for ways to improve the lives of many. And with me are three global pioneers: Root Capital founder William Foote, Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, Geeta Rao Gupta, and President of Avina, Maurizio Bionde Mora. Now, we've been looking at the challenges of creating partnerships of equals between social entrepreneurs and the communities they work with, and the question of having differing agendas. And I want to talk a bit more about how you tackle those challenges. Geeta, you talked a bit about how you deal with the sensitive issue of women's rights, but also there are other problems where you might come with more knowledge, for example, that could solve a problem, like, for example, inadequate sanitation in a community. How do you avoid the impression that you're imposing a vision on people, that you're imposing ideas on them?
I think it is true that when we enter a community as a social enterprise of any kind, we enter with certain knowledge that we would like to make available to the community in order for them to benefit from certain outcomes. And I think the way to go into an issue like sanitation then is to figure out a methodology whereby that information can be shared with them, but in a way where they can interpret the information in a context-specific way for their own lives. So for sanitation, for example, the old method used to be the toilets would get built somewhere, they would be shipped out to the communities, and communities would be told with a wagging finger, put them in place and use them. And what typically happened was the toilets were used to store, various things rather than be used at all as a toilet. And people continued to defecate in the open, which then has severe health consequences. So the new methodology that is being used by UNICEF and by many other organizations around the world now is called community-led total sanitation, which is a methodology where you come into the community as the outsider, basically sharing with them the knowledge on the consequences of open defecation for health of children, for example, but then talking to them just about, well, what do you do in the morning when you want to go to the bathroom? And walking with them through the community to say, where are the places where people defecate? And actually marking those points and then talking about where do children play then? Well, they play really close to where you defecate, or there's a water source right there. What do you suppose happened? Do your children fall sick? Why do they fall sick? So having a conversation with them in a way that allows them to realize in their own community what is the consequence of a particular behavior for a health consequence that they're interested in improving. And that methodology has resulted in the community then demanding some solution. And so that when you then present a particular type of technology of toilets to them, they then ask immediately the question of what does it cost, how can we put it in place. I've seen this in action, and it's pretty revolutionary. It's a participatory process, but it's a facilitated participatory process with a particular outcome in mind.
So you don't teach?
No, you don't teach. You
present the
hope
information.
that they will realize, based on the information you have, knowing that you have access to the information that they don't have access to. So there is an inequality in that regard, but the process by which you conduct the conversation is incredibly important for that to be done right, for the solution to be owned by the community. I think that's the trick.
I completely agree, but and I think a main point here is that you have to invent the approach depending on the situation. There is no manual that's going to tell you how.
Right.
And the capacity to invent this
So you have
is
to be
critical.
quick on your feet, actually.
Exactly. And you have to improvise many times. Let me give you an example that has happened to be exactly on women. I went in the state of Pernambuco in Brazil, somewhere lost. And I reach, I'll forget how I get there. It's complicated and far away, etc. But eventually, the purpose was to meet a woman who is one of the major leaders of the women's rural movement in Brazil. And she was in a lost village in Pernambuco. And she greeted me with like 20 other women. And we went first to take a cup of coffee in her house, in a tiny little place. And I saw on the wall just one thing. It was a black and white photo of a person. And I went and I said to her, "Who is she?" And she said, "It was my mother." "But tell me about her." And she said, "My mother had 14 kids. I'm one of the 14. And one day, when I was about 3 years old, she disappeared." The reason I say she disappeared instead of she died somewhere and we never found the body is because in the next days, we were all looking for knives. She had taken all the knives that we had in the house, and only years later they discovered under the ground in the garden. Why did she do that? Because she was afraid that when, not the husband, but the man with whom she had all those kids would realize that she had abandoned the family, essentially will kill himself and kill all the kids. Now, what is the point? Why did she leave? Why did she abandon her life? She says, "I have a guess," because she was too young to, but I'm sure it is right. She couldn't take it anymore. To be a slave and to have an impossible job of feeding 14 kids because the husband was an alcoholic. Now, what do you do in that situation? And I'm a man. I said, "Look, teach me about how somebody should be a good husband." And we spent 3 hours with them. And I was in tears. And I said, "I'm going to tell this to my wife. And I'm going to tell this to my wife." And when I came back, I make sure. So the bottom line is, to me, the issue of the disparity Oftentimes the disparity is reversed. They have so much more to give us than we can give them. Absolutely. And one of the things that can give us better than anything that I could find is a lesson of life. And that goes beyond any particular project.
I take an alternative view, a complementary view, but as a social entrepreneur, I think it's absolutely valid that you invent the situation based on what local reality is. There's another view is to say, in case of Root Capital, can we find situations where we can place local communities and people as empowered consumers? In other words, I believe that creating partnerships of equality in many respects is about finding situations where you can have commercial relationships with them, with local communities, where you have serious commitments on both sides, which in effect creates a relationship between adults. Actually, earlier somebody used the word transactional. Is it getting too transactional? Actually, I love that word because at Root Capital, it is all about negotiating interest rate, principal, terms and conditions. And if a cooperative really struggles and they default on the loan, we don't just let them off the hook. We restructure. We work out. And I think, one, don't infantilize people. And this is not...
But hang on, really.
But I'm saying this is not one... This is silver buckshot at best. It's not the silver bullet. So it doesn't work in a lot of situations where you truly have to just invent because there are such deep market failures or it's public health or something.
But there's also a question. I mean, your foundation works in places like northern Uganda where there's been conflict, right?
Yeah.
So how can you have a really transactional relationship with your client if they're so vulnerable and maybe they don't have any other opportunities? You can't give them a real choice.
It's a great question. So back to my point, can you find situations in northern Uganda where 1.4 million people were in the internally displaced camps up until 2007, whatever it is, 61% of the population there is below the poverty line because of the Lord's Resistance Army, etc. Can you find situations where actual commercial relations and business opportunities can create truly empowering and kind of equity circumstance for the farmers? And so just quickly, there is a problem, 2007, 2008, when the farmers start leaving those refugee camps, they return to the land to try to reclaim their lives as subsistence farmers. What do they need? A cash crop to pay for medical bills, to pay for the basics. And the economic mainstay of the region for decades was cotton. The only cotton ginnery in the region was shuttered for over a decade because of the fighting. So a local social entrepreneur shows up. An African social entrepreneur, cotton entrepreneur, says, I'm going to rent and rehabilitate that shuttered ginnery, and a bank won't touch me with a 10-foot pole. Root Capital makes a $700,000 loan in 2009. Acumen Fund, together, another kind of social lender. And 2 years later, they are now sourcing from 30,000 farmers across northwestern Uganda. And those farmers, we can talk about equality. What I care about is they are empowered to sell their product to a business that's paying them a good price, and they can pay for the basics and reclaim their lives on the land. So commercial situation allows you to kind of sidestep some of those issues, but it's absolutely not a silver bullet. It works in certain places. That's my point.
Okay, thank you. What about the brave new world that we're now in? I mean, everybody knows that the world's transforming and there's a shift of economic power away from the West towards the so-called East and South. India has gone from being a recipient of charity to being a big investor. And many countries in Africa are now, their economies are growing much faster than ours here in Britain, admittedly from a very small base. I wondered what this meant in general for the business of being a social entrepreneur. How do you have to adapt to this shift that you're seeing in the world?
I personally think it helps. And the very reason is that the gap is closer. They have a increased sense of self-worth. They feel that they have a dignity that they earn on their own and that nobody's perfect. It's obvious that the so-called wealthy person is far from perfect and makes mistakes that they used to be attributed to them. And that helps in the relationship. Building it's easier to find common ground and build something together.
I've seen actually two big shifts. One is that the aspirations have increased, the ambitions have increased, because what's possible now is more visible. I mean, I'm speaking, for example, in communities in India. It's very visible through the media, through just, the fact that the rich and the poor live in close proximity, what they don't have. And so the demand to live lives of dignity, to have more, is greater, which is actually a wonderful way in which to begin the conversation with the community that you enter. That's one big shift. And the second shift is that the impatience that comes with that is empowering, so that they ask about methods of, how do we hold people accountable, including us. So we walk into a community and promise certain things. Well, how will we know we got what you're promising? How will we hold you accountable? So some of the ways in which, community-led accountability mechanisms are put in place now, being very effective because of that demand and that impatience and that anger. In UNICEF, for example, in Uganda, the same technology we're talking about, the mobile, SMS texting, we're using that to check whether services and goods that were promised in a clinic, for example, are actually present or not. So a consumer who walks in can walk out immediately and text back saying, this was what was supposed to be in the clinic. I didn't find it when I went there. Or in a school, in a village school, to say, the teacher never showed today, that you can SMS it back to somebody that is counting and then making that visible to the government is a very empowering feeling. But a few decades ago, that kind of participation, not just because of the lack of the technology, but the belief that you could play that kind of a role among poor communities didn't exist in the same way. So I feel a distinct difference in the wanting to participate in the change that's happening.
Have you noticed
countries.
A reflection of this geopolitical economic shift?
I think the new economic reality was reflected in spades last night at the Skoll Award ceremony. The vast majority of the awardees were from developing countries. You've had this huge influx of talent with the new economic reality of local people who've worked in the private sector, for instance, who are now so charged to take that skill set, like Diakasal, our Senegalese loan officer, and apply it in creative, disruptive ways to address the great problems. And that forces us as social entrepreneurs based, say, in the United States, to do what? Very aggressively decentralize and embed ourselves and our innovations in local markets and hire local people, and that they become really the leaders of this movement. I think that's already happening. It's very different from 10 years ago, and it's a super exciting development.
I just want to go to the audience. There's a man with his hand up here. I very much would like to hear your views about how the whole business of being a social entrepreneur is changing given these shifts. Here's a microphone.
Nick Danzig, I would say social photographer rather than social entrepreneur. I've been to many of these places. I think the schism is getting much greater between the haves and the have-nots, including in our own societies. The frustrations are, in fact, leading to violence, to bitterness. And many of the countries that you're talking about, Burkina Faso, Uganda, how many schools have you been to where classes are under 100 pupils? And so I think the partnerships that are being created are still very unequal. We also are in a rush. We're in a rush to bring people out of extreme poverty. They're in a rush to get out of extreme poverty. And it's not working at the speeds that we want. We do need to form those partnerships. And you talk about the agricultural sector, but unless we have a holistic approach where we take health, agriculture, education, all as a combination, we're not going to move forward.
So Gita says that this impatience and anger is empowering. You're not agreeing?
No, I think in many places, because there is no movement forward, huge swathes of society. You talk about northern Uganda, the frustration of young people who go to school today. They don't have pens, they don't have pencils. The teachers run out of chalk. Chalk is rationed in the schools. And if we talk about targets, because everyone is texting, everyone's in school, but what kind of education are they getting? Uganda so happens to be one of the countries that is going to meet its MDG 2 target.
But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that impatience and frustration that you see today, I have been to communities 10 years ago where they would take that as their lot. It is my fate. This is, we are poor, they're the rich, we don't have. It doesn't exist anymore. There is an anger out there, which I think is very important for the kind of social movement that we are seeking, because the inequalities are more visible. They're more visible and they are greater, in fact.
More thoughts from the audience? Anyone else who'd like to address this point? Yes.
My name is Michael Shapcott with the Wellesley Institute in Toronto in Canada. We work in urban neighborhoods in Canada, so the culture, the geography, much different, but the themes are actually very similar. For instance, one of our projects is working with homeless youth aged 16 to 29 pre-employment training project. When we work with youth, they tell us they're low income, they don't have housing, so lots of material deprivation, but they're not stupid and weak, and they don't want to be treated as being powerless. They want, in terms of social entrepreneurship, they want to be in a relationship that allows them to actually move forward in tangible ways. We find part of the challenge is not just simply wanting to get money in order to support the programs and projects, but it's actually to tap into skills. And so one practical example out of this youth project is young people want help in creating social enterprises. They want business skills. So we link them up with successful private sector businesses. So it's not about an exchange of money, grants or loans, but it's about a transfer of skills to help young people get established. This is very important.
Okay, thank you. There was a lady there. Yes.
Hi, my name is Darlene, and I'm with the MatterNet, which we're using flying autonomous vehicles to deliver goods in countries where there are not good roads. And one thought that struck me is that we've been talking about this as partnerships, and I wonder if what we actually need to talk about is evolving into teams, because that, to me, is the ideal, where you have a team of investors, team of community members, teams of partners, and just like any team, like Brizio was saying, you bring together people with the same values. Like that team is so core to begin with, and then you go through a process where you talk about, this is our vision, this is what we need to get there, and the challenges that a local person might face in their culture, or the team's challenges, if you need to report to your results, that's the whole teams. And I think so we need to evolve to a place where that's the level we're working on, and that we also realize we're a team working in a global world, and we're not just isolated. And all of these concerns that we're talking about, we need to deal with as a team.
So maybe the question is not how you get a partnership of equals, but maybe we shouldn't talk about partnerships at all. Certainly not of equality.
Well, this in the context of a changing world, as you're saying. Okay, let me just mention a trend that I think is very significant about that. In top U.S. business schools, foreigners who take the MBA are radically different what were there 10 years or 20 years before. Before, their dream was to finish the MBA and continue to work in the States. Today, they want to go back to their own country. Why? Because of that impatience that you were saying, they feel there is a chance to change. So they come not just as businessmen, but as social entrepreneurs. And that is an opportunity. Of course, the world is complex. You can say it's half empty, the glass, or half full. I believe it's half full. The opportunities are incredible today, more than ever.
Willie?
We have two people in Haiti. Both of them are of Haitian diaspora. So excited to be able to come back to Haiti and work in an institutional context that wasn't there before, and they can address big issues. To the partnership question, I think it's about integration. Integration for mutual benefit. And to the question regarding the silos, one of the great of social entrepreneurship, the great challenges and dangers of social entrepreneurship is that we drink our Kool-Aid so much that it's more dynamic, it's more competitive, it's more innovative, it's market-driven. And guess what? Root capital ain't making any difference in the world if we're not vertically integrating across health and education and other things. The power of the Skoll World Forum is you bring all these different folks who are in verticals. How do you horizontally integrate those verticals? It's a huge challenge, super important. So I think the integration, I would not want to jettison the notion of partnership. I love that word, but integration, I think, is really what it's about.
Do you think this transformation, then, Willie, has to mean that today's social entrepreneurs will invent themselves out of existence, that in a few more years, the sort of people who'd be sitting here in this Skoll Forum would be completely different people?
The way I'd say is we want to work ourselves out of a job, absolutely, make ourselves redundant. The depth of the market failures are such that as long as we're the catalyst who's always out there serving the least served segment of the market, there's many, many decades, maybe even centuries of work to do. But what you need to be very careful is, as a social entrepreneur, you're not distorting the market. When the private sector or the public sector can move in and address those markets, they should do it, we should withdraw. And shame on us if we don't.
Geeta, briefly, the future of partnerships.
I think the word partnership is fabulous. I love the word team as well, and I do think that we have to work across sectors and work with every partner in the team, clearly specifying what their role is and what they bring to the table. That's what creates the best kind of outcome, I think.
And should it be a partnership of equality?
I don't like the word partnership of equality because it's so fundamentally unequal in some ways. You can call it a partnership of equality if you decide that the resources that each is bringing to the table are of equal value, which is where you should get to in order to have success. But when it starts out, I don't think communities view it as a partnership of equality.
Thank you, all three of you. William Foote, Geeta Rao Gupta, and Brizio Biondemora. And just to say that if you've anything more to add on fostering relationships that bring change, or anything else that you've heard on the programme, or if you want to find out more about our guests and our programme, then contact us via bbcworldservice.com/forum, or tweet us at BBC The Forum. But for now, for me, Bridget Kendall, and everyone here on the Forum team and here in Oxford, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, everyone. That was a fantastic discussion. Thank you. That was great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was terrific.
Thank you.